Hi folks, welcome again to another episode of My Life with Robert Burns. Jim Thompson and Douglas Mackenzie here again to talk to one of our cronies from around the Burns world. Hi Jim, how you doing?
Doing great, Douglas. Hi everybody.
How's life with you at the moment, Jim?
Aye, it's very challenging with a two-year-old most days, and keeps me busy. And today is my other grandson's 9th birthday, and we've had up at the birthday party and no cake for Jim.
You must be the only person in the country not eating cake.
Probably, but I prefer today without the sugar, to be honest.
Well, folks, tonight's guest was the youngest chairman at Carrick Burns Club at 25 years old. Fast forward 50 years, and tonight, cronies everywhere, we'd like to welcome Denis Reid.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you, gentlemen.
How are you doing, Denis?
I'm doing remarkably well for having been 75 and heading for 76 and having osteoarthritis and needing 2 hips and 2 knees. But apart from that, I'm fine.
Just a healthy young thing, eh?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Just in case you've not got long left, we'll better get started. And the first question is always, Denis, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I was born in Girvan here in 1946, the son of Thomas and Agnes Reid. My family operated a joiners, builders and funeral directors business in the town. My great-grandfather, Thomas Reid, who was born in 1848, came to Girvan from Trabbich in North Ayrshire, where the family had indeed many branches. All of them had been farmers for generations in farms such as Hunterston, Garrick Hill, Creach Hill, Gibson, and my grandfather had left farming at Gibson and served his time in Tom's joiner shop at Trabbich. I think he was the youngest one on the farm, and probably there wasn't a place for him in the farm. We never really found out. But he served his time at Trabbich, and he founded the business in Girvan in 1886. He came down to Girvan. My father, who followed on after my great-grandfather and my grandfather and my father and Uncle Robert took over the business. And my dad was an extremely, I like to say, a well-educated man. He was a collector of books, antiques, a student of Scottish history, and apart from managing the family firm, he was also a qualified pipe organist, a Freemason, a member of Provincial Grand Lodge in Edinburgh. He was also a founder member of and a president of Girvan branch of Toastmasters International and later Girvan Speakers Club. Now, following my primary education, I attended 7 years at Girvan High School, where I developed a love of Scottish history, partly from there and partly from my father. I became a member of the School Literary and Debating Society. And it was through that I attended and spoke at my first Burns supper, would you believe? I can't quite remember what age I was, 15 or 18. And I was hooked. I began to look closely at the work and times of Robert Burns. Now, my first job, I think, if I remember right, I was 12-year-old and I got a job as a message boy with James Kirkwood, fishmonger in Girvan. And I remained there, would you believe, during school holidays and weekends till I completed my hire at 17. Now, my father and Uncle Robert by this time were running the builder's business. And they asked me if I wanted to join the family business. And when I declined, my dad said that it was just as well, he said, because all you can do with a saw is make sawdust. So I didn't get, and he was right. I didn't get to the family firm. Actually, originally I wanted to go to art school. And however, things didn't work out for that. My grandfather, William Reid, had, apart from the family business, worked for some time. He was a qualified sanitary inspector in the very early days. And I picked up some of his books and stuff in my dad's library. And I quite liked what he was doing. And I happened to see a vacancy for an apprentice sanitary inspector with Ayr County Council. And I applied for the job and I got it eventually. And eventually I qualified as a sanitary inspector and meat inspector with Ayr County Council. And I stayed with them. And then I moved on to Kyle and Carrick District Council eventually. And finally with South Ayrshire Council, where I finished up as environmental health manager. And I retired from that at 55. Now, I was involved in a very, career-wise, in a strange thing, battle reenactment, medieval and Scottish battle reenactment. And I was a founder member of Carrick 800 battle reenactment, which was used, it was 100 years, we founded it 100 years from Carrick to break away from Galloway. And for many years, I had made a lot of contacts, including Historic Scotland and the National Trust. And that and my main interest in Scottish history led me to start my own company, Black Raven Living History, when I retired. And I created 35 characters from Scots history, working in full costumes, telling their life stories in a series of shows as the person. And 3 of these were directly connected to Burns. One was Tam O'Shanter. The second was Sir Walter Scott, who met Burns in a library in the city when Scott was a boy at Edinburgh High School. And the third was the infamous Deacon Brodie, who lived and worked right across the road from Burns' first apartment in Edinburgh. So that's the career background.
Wow, that was quite a journey there.
That was
you took us down all these pipes at a hell of a rate. So let's go back a wee bit and talk a bit about primary school. What sort of interest was there in Burns at primary school?
At my time, not a great deal. We started in the wee tiny school in Henrietta Street, and then we moved on. We were out at Grangestone Industrial Estate for a while the new academy is getting built, a new high school is getting built in Girvan. And I can't honestly relate much interest in the primary school. I think the first time it really developed at all was as I say, I'd picked up some stuff from my dad because he being an organist, he played at Burns suppers and different things. So I picked up a bit there, but I would be wrong to say it started in primary school. It was in secondary.
And when you're at secondary school, apart from leading towards your eventual career, what were the subjects that interested you most?
Oh, the things, well, strange enough, I didn't have any interest in science, would you believe, when I was at secondary. History was one of my main thing, English and history, and art. These were my 3 main interests. And I think that linked into quite a lot because, as I said to you, when I formed my own living history business, that led to me having to research a lot of these characters and write their story in a one-man version. So it really started in secondary.
And getting back to the living history business, how does that work? Do you put on performances in local halls, or how does it?
Sometimes I did some film work with film companies, but basically a lot of it was Historic Scotland, and I used to do with Historic Scotland in Edinburgh Castle. I did 2 days a week, Monday and Tuesday, right through the summer for about 12 years, 4 shows a day. Had a lot of different characters, and it went down very well. There were half-hour shows, and you were right in among the audience in the Great Hall, and you picked up a lot from them too, but I thoroughly enjoyed doing that. Film work came in as well. Sometimes they would want to make a film about something. One of the characters I did was the Doomster, was the King's Executioner, and then Shanter was one which I did for them too, telling the true story of Tam O'Shanter about how he had worked at Shanter and how he had got into positions that Burns met him and heard about him. And there's actually a film, I think, on somewhere with Historic Scotland of me doing that actual character. So that's how it worked.
I noticed on your Facebook page that one of the photographs is of you in character. What character would that? Is a guy with a kind of satchel on?
Aye, that's the Storyteller, the Scottish Storyteller, where I could appear and tell different tales from Scottish history. Very much the way they've done in Burns' time, when the packman arrived round with his bag on, and he would be able to tell, tales that happened, and they would pick up and go into the countryside where people didn't meet a lot of folk. They were at home at the time. So the packman would tell them stories. So that's what that character was. But I mean, I even did Bonnie Prince Charlie as an older man. At Culloden on the battlefield there, and when people arrived in, there were quite a few funny incidents there. I remember one day, you're allowed onto the battlefield without going through the centre, but to get into the centre you had to pay. And one of the prefabricated walls blew down this Sunday, and these 4 Americans tried to come in, and one of the other reenactor guys had 4 redcoats who were guarding this entrance, and you can't come through, you'll have to go through and pay. And eventually they fell out, and they were going to force their way through. And these boys had fixed bayonets, and this big yank turned around and shouts, and I'm standing beside them, he shouts back, he says, during the Wars of Independence, he says, Culloden, you lot were nothing but a shower of bees, and you're still a shower of bees. And walked off and left them. So there was a lot of fun in it as well.
Very good. And do you have any favourite characters that you played?
Oh, aye. I played, I liked doing Bonnie Prince Charlie. I liked doing the Doomster. I played a lot of the Chancellor, the King's Chancellors at Edinburgh Castle. I did with two other actor boys that helped me, The Murder of the Douglases in Edinburgh Castle, The Black Dinner. So there were quite a few. Another one I thoroughly enjoyed doing was Ensign Ewart of the Royal Scots Greys in Edinburgh Castle. I had the full costume and telling the story of Ensign Ewart. And I got a lot of valuable help from the museum, the Scott Greys Museum, and that went down very well. So there was a whole lot of different, 35 I think I had in all at the end of the day. And all the costumes. My wife couldn't get into the wardrobe for these costumes.
I was going to ask how your wife and family coped with all these characters.
I don't think they know who they were talking to next. But no, we did actually on two occasions. I did the festival. One as King James VI, and the other one as James VI was a good one actually. I thoroughly enjoyed doing him. I also did Deacon Brodie a week, and Historic Scotland sponsored me in the castle, and we did a full show in there. So that was good. That was good. And the family helped out there, the stewards, etc.
Very good. And what about other hobbies? Before we got on to Burns, what other hobbies did you have?
Oh, plenty. I had a lot of hobbies. Archery, I took up archery for a long time. I was a member of our archery club, and we also had a club here at Girvan at one point. Apart from the battle reenactment, I was keen in painting. I love collecting antiques and still do, and books, old books. I've got quite a good collection of antique books, not just Scottish history, but Ayrshire history particularly. And a lot of Robertson. I collect Robertson's books. And I also do some writing, and I build model boats. I've been building model boats for years, some radio controlled, and I still do that. And I did quite a bit of writing, and I had poems published, but my most real success was there. I had a booklet published entitled Blood Feud of the Kennedys, which was tales of all the horrible incidents that paid out between the Kennedys of Castles and Burgundy during the great feuds in Carrick here in the 17th century, in the early 1600s. And then I ended up, believe it or not, as chairman of the Writers' Club in Stranraer. And of course, I had joined Toastmasters International. I was up in the Speakers Club for a long time too. So many varied hobbies. I've never wearied, let's put it that way.
It sounds like you've been a really busy man. And that doesn't include your job. You need to tell us something about the role of a sanitary inspector. I've just got visions of pipes and smelly stuff.
Oh, you're back to the early days. No, there was a lot involved in it. I mean, eventually they changed it from Sanitary Inspector to Environmental Health Officer. And by the time I finished up as manager, we were covering pollution control, noise, radiation contamination, health and safety, food hygiene, and all these different things. It encompassed so many things. It was quite a complex. Pest control and all these sort of things came into it. Fascinating job. I loved it until I was made up to divisional officer for the Carrick division, and I still had contact with all the farmers and all the local folk, and I preferred the personal contact. When I moved to Ayr as manager, it was more office based, and that I enjoyed it, but it wasn't just as good. I'm a great person. I like talking to folk.
And apart from the journey between Carrick and Edinburgh for your reenactment stuff, do you do much other travelling?
I did a lot of travelling around about when I was doing Burns suppers, but I'm not a great international. I'll not fly, would you believe? I've never flown in my life, and my wife's the same. So we've been over to France and we've been to Ireland and various places, but although I like history and I watch a lot on television, I've never had a great notion to actually travel physically. That maybe sounds strange, but it's true. I used to say to people when they said, "Why won't you fly?" I said, "Well, Confucius used to say, what goes up must come down. And it's how it comes down that worries me." I was invited to go to Dubai to address the Haggis, would you believe? And I didn't go because I wouldn't fly. I was also invited to go to Australia, and I thought, that was too far. I didn't fancy that to do a mortal memory, but I'll tell you a little story about that. While I was working, a colleague of mine in the town hall in Ayr. He had relatives in Australia, and he was going out there, and he'd never spoken at a burn supper in his life. And he said to me, "Will you do me a toast to the lassies?" So I wrote him a toast to the lassies. And he went away out. And as you know, being a Burns Club guy, if somebody's going to another club, you always send a wee message wishing them all the best at their burn supper, etc. So I sent this message with it. And this friend of mine got up to speak, and he said, before the start, he said, and he was away out in some billabong, miles away out in the outback. There's about 120 people there, and he said they were all hillbilly, nice folk, but he said it was way out. And he said, I stood up and he said, I wish to give you a message here from Carrick Burns Club, wishing you all the best tonight at your burn supper, from the secretary, Denis Reid. And he says, everybody cheered. And then this voice shouted from back, "That's so-and-so, is he still alive? I kent him when I was in Girvan." And it was a guy I know very well who was a piper, and he used to be a piper in Girvan, a great friend. And he's back in the town now, and we still reminisce about things like that. So there you go.
Well, Denis, you've got us on to Burns with that wee story, which was great. So I'm going to pass over to Jim to get you talking a bit more about your interest in Burns.
Right, Jim.
Denis, just to go back a wee bit, was your grandfather in any way involved with Burns? You mentioned your dad.
Strangely enough, my great-grandfather was a founder member of Carrick Burns Club. My grandfather wasn't really, he was more just involved in the business. But my father was involved in Burns, but it was my great-grandfather that really, I had all his books and stuff, and it was really through him that I got eventually into the Carrick Burns Club. I can tell you about that in a minute or two.
Well, just go ahead and tell us about Carrick Burns Club.
Well, what happened, it was a bit of an accolade, if I can say to you. It was through the Speakers Club that I started to get invited to a series of local Burns suppers. And there were quite a few local ones, but then came what I still regard as a fantastic accolade. Carrick Burns Club was founded here in Girvan in 1893, and my great-grandfather was a founding member. Now, at that time, the committee had a very unusual way of setting up their office bearers. They didn't have a membership as such. Anybody who wanted tickets for the supper could come, and they had the ladies present from 1900. It's a mixed club, it still is to this day. But the interesting thing was the club president at that time had to find his vice chairman from somebody in the community. And these guys were all at that time, when I joined, it was all councillors and doctors and bankers and well-kent folk. And I was brought up to addressing these people with their second name, Mr. and Lord so-and-so and everything. And I got a phone call from Campbell Crawford, who was the accountant in Murray and Tate's office, lawyers in Girvan. And Campbell was president this particular year. And he said, I want you to come in and see me. So I went in to see him, and he said, I want you to come in as my vice president of Carrick Burns Club at 25. Well, I was quite taken aghast, Jim, because I mean, at that age, and knowing all these people, I thought, what am I going into here? Although I knew my great-grandfather had been a founder member, and I was quite keen. But I talked it over, and I said to Campbell, how many other people have turned you down? And I never found out. So whether I was 50th or 60th, I don't know. But I was asked to do it, and I did. And it was great. But the only thing was, he didn't tell me until I'd accepted the role of vice chair that I was responsible solely for picking the speakers the following year when I became president. And I was very, very fortunate because, it's hard to find when you're a young lad and you know certain folk, but you don't know everybody. So it was quite good because it was, my first immortal memory there was Willie Ross, who was Secretary of State for Scotland at the time. Mm-hmm. And his auntie lived in Girvan and had a butcher's business, and I knew her quite well. And I was talking to her, and I was a bit worried who I would get to do the immortal memory, and she put me onto Willie Ross, the late Willie Ross, and he was brilliant. And that set me off. So that's how I got into the club, through my great-grandfather being a member. And an interesting aside of Carrick Burns Club is the fact that our patron is Lord Ailsa, currently Lord David Kennedy, but his brother, Lord Charles, was patron. And it was interesting because their great-grandfather was the founding patron of the Carrick Burns Club too. So we all had quite a lot in common. There you go.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier on your first Burns supper. Where and when was that?
Oh, the very first one now, wait, I think that would be back. It would be, apart from the school, I think the first one I was invited, we had Burns suppers through the Speakers Club. We had them every year. And of course, other guys would come in and met you, and that was fine. But I think The first one I spoke at was actually Daily Burns Club, Daily Jolly Beggars. And I'll never forget that one because I was asked to toast the lasses, to toast All Scotia, rather. And one of the guys sitting beside me, who was very famous at that time, was a man called Willie Cloy. And Willie was the station master at Glenwillie Station on the Girvan to Stranraer line. I mean, it's a derelict station now on the line, but he was there full time and he lived there. And what a speaker this guy was. I mean, one of the funniest men, Jim, I've ever come across. And he was an orator. I mean, he was a wordsmith. And I had to sit and listen to him before I got a chance to speak. I thought, how do I follow somebody like this? But strangely enough, Willie became a good friend and he took me under his wing and I learned a lot from him. So that was the very first one that I did. And it was an eye-opener. And then I followed on from there to Bar Burns Club and a whole lot of local ones. So there was quite a lot to it.
Have you any fond recollections of a particular Burns supper?
Oh, good, one or two. You've got me there right enough. One of the ones that I can give you, an outstanding one for me, was the Carrick Burns Club one year when we got the West German ambassador to Britain, Baron von Richthofen, to come and propose our toast to we don't have an Old Scotia, it's My Scotland. And we usually gave it to somebody who had a love of Scotland, had lived in the country for a long time. But I happened to notice as secretary in the Sunday Post, this Baron von Richthofen, there's an article about him in the Sunday Post, and he said his one ambition was to go to a Burns supper in Scotland and attend a Burns club. He had never been, and this was one of his ambitions. And me being a kind of country chiel thought, there's an idea. So I wrote to the Sunday Post and they put me in touch with him. And lo and behold, he accepted. And he came up here and he did a marvellous My Scotland toast. But that night we had a very funny incident because you'll remember Malky McCormick, the late cartoonist. Well, Malky was a great friend of mine and he was actually doing the toast to the lasses, I think, that night. And when the Baron got up to, before the Baron got up to speak, Malky stood up and he was doing the toast to the lasses and he said, "Gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I would like to congratulate my host at the King's Arms Hotel for putting a propeller on the ceiling for making the Baron feel welcome." He was the great grandson of the bloody Red Baron, right? And the intake of breath, everybody went, "Oh no." And he started to laugh. And afterwards, his wife told me, he said, nobody in Germany would have dared to say something like that. He says he loved every minute of it. In fact, Malky got on very well with him. So that was a very interesting one. Another highlight for me was, in fact, which I think now was, on our 100th Burns supper, we had an evening of costume when we went back to the first supper in the club. And we had a great president at that time. The first one was Provost William McRae, who was known as the Grand Old Man of Carrick. And I decided, we found the original immortal memory that they proposed at the first supper. And I got hold of this and I learned it. And I dressed up as Provost McRae with the sideburns and had a photograph of him and delivered the memory as Provost McRae. So that was quite a memorable occasion. But one of the funniest, I have to tell you, if they're still interested, one of the funniest ones I have to tell you, a lot of laughs over the years. I was delivering the immortal memory at Mabel Speakers Club. And there's always a good night in there. And a group of the guys who were all kind of well-known chiels decided they would do the Jolly Beggars cantata as a group. And Gilbert McKellar, who was a great pianist and organist at the time, a great musical guy, he organised all this, and they all dressed up as the individual characters from Pussy Nancy's. And out at the front was the soldier dressed, obviously. And the guy who played the part had his leg tied up at the back. It was his Pat Shields, he's the late Pat Shields, a good friend, but he's been gone for years, but what a character. And he had his leg tied up behind his back to show that he looked like the wounded soldier with a wooden leg or his leg missing. And he had a brush or a crutch, and he's dressed as a Waterloo soldier. And we're sitting at the top table, and they came across the room all singing and dancing, and McKellar's playing away, when all of a sudden Pat fell on the floor, went down with a great bang. And of course, everybody laughed and thought it was part of the show. And then we suddenly realised it wasn't part of the show. So another guy and I ran out to him, and he's lying on the floor, and it showed you what kind of character he was. He'd broken his good leg in 2 places. And all he had to say was, "Dennis, are you still smoking these wee cigars? Can I have one?" And he said to the other guy, "Get me a half." And he's sitting there with a half when the medics arrived to take him away, and they put him onto a stretcher, but found they couldn't get it down the narrow stairs, so to take him out the fire escape. And as he went out the fire escape, Gilbert McKell's playing the Death March, and the whole place was an absolute uproar. And even he enjoyed it, and he said one of the biggest laughs, when they got to the hospital, the nurses thought it was an actual wounded soldier. So it was quite a night. That was quite a night. But I mean, I'm sure you guys will know the same. When you go to these suppers, you don't know what's going to happen next. One other highlight I would like to mention, though, that somebody I learned a lot from, was Sir Robert Grieve, who was chairman of the Highlands and Islands Development Group. And I got to know him very well. And he came to Carrick, and standing beside him, listening to him speak, he was a real wordsmith. He really was. It was something else, a real character. So I learned a lot from him. But some great nights, absolutely fantastic. And another one I remember at Daly one night, at the supper there, the guy who carried the haggis in was a right character. Always came for a laugh, and he had too much to drink before the supper. And he got up on the table, there was a long table to run along the top of the table, and he dropped the haggis, and it landed on a couple of two guys, and they all got covered in the haggis. So that was another highlight. But there you go.
See the Death March thing, you know, it just, one of my best pals ever was a cop I used to work with, Sanny Drain, and Sanny he's from down your way, actually, Sanny originally. And when Sanny died, he wanted everybody to leave the crematorium with the song "Always Looking the Bright Side of Death." And I mean, it was just full of Burnsians, and it was a great funeral. However, in terms of Burns, any favourite poems or songs, anything that sticks?
Oh, I've got quite I've never, like, when you look at Tam O'Shanter and Holy Willie, I can recite bits of them in between, but I've never learned the whole thing. Just one or two. I've got several favourites, actually. One of the questions that you mentioned to me that you would be asking would be who I thought was sort of Burns' heroes. Well, I've got a funny outlook on that, because my thoughts are, I think that one of the big things about Robert Burns is the fact that he knew everybody. He didn't who you were, whether you were a horseman, you were what your background was. He had a very good knowledge of everybody and their insight into the way they acted. And some of my heroes are actually Tam O'Shanter, who farmed down here, and Suitor Johnny. I think they were a great couple of guys. When you go into their background out with Burns, I think Holy Willie must have been a great character to meet. William Creech, you know, for all the work he did for Burns too. But even those folk that Burns castigated, like Willie Nichol of Edinburgh High School, is to me a bit of a hero, because I would love to know how they reacted to Burns. I mean, Burns said to him, I love these kind of bits where he said, "You maggots feed on Nichol's brain for few sick feasts you've gotten, and fix your claws in Nichol's heart, for deal, I bet it's rotten." I mean, to be able to castigate somebody you didn't like that. And another lovely one that I liked was that when he had something to do with the court at the time, but he did an address to the Lord Advocate. It's very short, and I think this really, when you see what's going on with the law today with the Met in London and everything, I think this sums it up. And this was, he said to the Lord Advocate, he clenched his pamphlets in his fist, he quoted and he hinted, till a declamation missed with argument he tinted. He gaped for it, he fun it was a law man. And I like this bit. But what his common sense came short, he eked it out with law man. In other words, he couldn't convict again, but he found it in the law. So these sort of things I think are absolutely great. My favourite poems too, I love Tam O'Shanter and Holy Willie, I really do, but one of my favourites that I don't think is recited often enough is Grim Griselle. It's from the Merry Muses, and it's a wee bit, some of the ladies don't necessarily maybe like it, but the chap Cook from Maybole, he was a great reciter of that. I mean, some of these poems he was really good at, and I like that. I think that's great too. Also, the only thing I'm really, if I'm renowned for anything, guys, it's Address to the Haggis. I do it every year. I have done for 30 years at Carrick and various other places. I've been asked to go and do it at local functions and private functions and different things. So that's one of my favourites.
Well, from where we're looking, we can't tell if you've got haggis in front of you or not. But
no, I haven't. No, I've got and I'll tell you a song I like, Willie Brewed a Peck of Malt. I think that's outstanding. I do that. I do that with two pals, and it's a wee act we do, and it's quite good. I like it. You want a wee round of Willie Brood?
Go for it.
Oh, Willie Brood, a peck of mutton, rabanal and camty Three blither earth at Lee Langneck, you wouldna find in christen me. For we arena few, or know that few, it's just a drappy in Newry. The cock may crow, the day may dawn, but I will taste the barley brie. Oh, first to rise and gang awo, a coward cuckoo in the sea. For last beside his church shall fall, he is the king among we three. For we are na few, or no that few, it's just a drappy in Newry. The cock may crow, the day may dawn, but I will taste the barley brie.
Well done. There was a hell of a temptation there to join in the chorus.
I'm just thinking that, but the problem with Zoom is it becomes just as an assassination.
I thought I'd leave you the two middle verses out, but there you go. It's a great finish of that. I'll tell you one thing I would like to say though. I think I'm a great admirer of Burns. What sometimes annoys me a wee bit is over the years, I've gone to a lot of Burns suppers. I'm an honorary member at Wigton, and I've got a good relationship with Bridgeton Burns Club. They're the biggest club in the country. They've over 300, 400 members. And I've spoken a couple of times in Glasgow at it. And I've made a lot of friends there, folk far, far more knowledgeable about Burns than me. And they're great contacts for the Burns supper. And I used to go down to Mochram and places in Wigtonshire and do it. But one of the things that I think about Burns is that no matter how you look at him, one of the things, and it's good I'm digressing a bit, I've got a very good friend who is soused in Burns, songs and poems, but him and I argue because he's firmly in the belief that Burns was just an ordinary working man who had no time for the gentry and all that kind of carry on. And I keep saying to him, you're wrong. Because he went top north, and he was a working man, and most of his stuff was to do with the ordinary folk. But by God, you're not going to tell me he didn't enjoy his nights with the gentry when the beer was running free and the wine and whiskey he was being feted. He wouldn't be human if he didn't. But having said that, I do believe that the one big thing that he got from it, and one of the things that I think sell him to everybody all over the world, of all that, there's one small poem that sums up to me just how much Burns enjoyed a gathering of friends, a dram, good company and crack. Indeed, there's no, in similar circumstances, be it at a Burns supper or a family gathering, there's not an occasion like that that I don't think of this poem and how well Burns summed it all up, what it meant to him. And you must know this one, it's a bottle and an honest friend. Here's a bottle and an honest friend. What would you wish for mair, man? What kens afore his life may end? But he's sheer of grief and care, man. Then catch the moments as they fly and use them as they ought, man. Believe me, happiness is shy and comes not aye when sought, man. And I often think that's so important because we all think about tomorrow and plan ahead. You don't know if you're going to have a tomorrow, really. What you're doing tonight might be the last time you're there, and I think you've got to remember that. I think Burns knew that, and I think that's one of the things that sold him all over the world. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know.
Can I ask you about your time? You said that you were the youngest chairman of Carrick Burns Club at 25. Yeah. But I mean, in the intervening years, you've been secretary for most of these years.
I've been 30. No, I was 25. I was chairman, and then you stayed on the committee. You joined the committee, and was the committee for a while. And then, in the long history of the club, there was 2 years where the then current secretary, things had got a grip on him, and the club, they were spending money like water, if I'm honest about it. And everybody who spoke got a bunch of flowers if his wife was there, or somebody got a bottle of whiskey, and it was getting beyond the joke. And the club, they were having financial trouble, and we missed one supper, I think, or 2 suppers. And then a group of us got together and said, this has got to stop, and we reformed the group. Dr. Neil Brown, myself, Kenneth Kidd, a lot of old Girvan worthies at the time, Campbell Crawford, we all got back together and reformed. They didn't reform it, but we took over the club and rebuilt it again. And there were a fantastic number of people. Some of these people were great speakers. Kenneth Kidd, you may have heard of, he had a furniture business in Girvan. And the talent that Kenneth had, I could have been sitting there at the night of the Burns Supper, and a speaker would call off, and it didn't matter what it was, memory, lasses, Old Scotia. Kenneth could stand up on his feet and propose a toast without a note. I mean, that's a talent in its own right. And he was very good and verbal with Burns' work. Absolutely incredible. And you don't see these people every day.
And is your main activity as a club your annual celebration, or do you do other things?
Oh no, well we do other things. We have had a couple of concerts on occasion, not for a long time. One of the big things that we do that is very important is we support the schools in competition. We have Colmanale and Ballantrae, both schools. We've got Girvan Primary, Sacred Heart Primary in Girvan, and we support all 4 schools in Burns. And what we do is they're very good. They run competitions every year, and our committee members judge. And then we put up prizes for the best presentation in the school. They get a book, a full Burns book, and they get a pen and a certificate. Other ones get pens and certificates. We give prizes out for all of that. And then we've just started recently a new thing. The best speaker for the youngster we bring to the supper, and the person does the recitation in front of the whole club at the Burns Supper. Now, first we planned it for a wee while, but the logistics were difficult to get everybody there. So it happened on Saturday night at Turnberry Hotel. We met in the Girvan King's Arms for years. And then we moved from there to Malin Court at Maidens, which was very good. And then, of course, with the COVID situation and things going wrong, they closed down, and they are now purely a nursing home. So we could find another venue, and we managed to negotiate Turnberry Hotel, and it went very well on Saturday night. And this young lass came up, and she was from Sacred Heart Primary in Girvan, and what a recitation she gave. It was absolutely super. So we do support things like that. And we financially supported, of course, the Burns Fed at the Burns thing at Ayr when they built the new building. You know, you could give a donation to that. So we support a lot of different things that way, but we have the main supper, and we don't have a paid membership as such. We the committee look on, I suppose it's just the way the club has always worked. We insist where we can on formal dress. Now, I know you might think something that's a snobbish thing. It's not. They're not a snobbish club at all. It's tradition. It was always formal dress, and it's one of the traditions that we've kept going. And the ladies being present is another thing, because there's not many folk where ladies can get dressed up now. Having said that, I like an old male night, I must admit. I'm not going to deny that. But it's good having them there at times. And so we've been innovative in a lot of things. But what I was trying to say was the club, we don't have a membership, a paid membership. All the folk that buy tickets and go to the supper this year get their chance of tickets next year and are officially the members of the club. And they can nominate a committee member, or we'll see somebody that we think would make a good committee member from the body of the kirk and invite them in. So that's the way it works now.
And you mentioned that you had some big names as speakers. Are all your speakers invited guests?
Oh yes. The speakers, what we do with them, we don't fear speakers. That's one rule we've never done. And we've had some real crackers over the years. What we do is we invite them to come and do a particular toast, and what we do is we give them overnight accommodation in the hotel, and they get their meal and everything like that. But we don't fee speakers as such. Mind you, I don't know how you guys are finding it, but I think nowadays there are more certain people you approach are now looking for a fee. You know, and I think I personally think that's an unfortunate way to go. I know some people make their living at it, but I'm one of these people who goes to a lot of these suppers and things where they have speakers, and some of them are guy poor and they're getting £500 and £600 a night.
There's an active debate on one of the social media channels that some of the Burnsians contribute to. So there's a debate about, you know, accepting a fee or not accepting a fee. I don't think anyone has reached a conclusion on it. We've talked a bit about suppers and the people that come along to suppers. Do you ever play any of these characters that you mentioned at these suppers?
Yes, I've done a lot of the old male suppers. I did Tam O'Shanter as the real character. Now, I read a book, I've still got it up in my library, by a minister who had researched Tam O'Shanter. And Douglas Graham, he owned the farm at Shanter, but he was into a lot of different things. And he told the story that how Douglas Graham how Burns had got the information from Suitor Johnny and some of the rest of them, and wrote the poem on the lines that they were suggesting. But what had happened was, he used to go into Ayr. He had a relation in Ayr, and he used to sell the meal for the tippenny ale to this guy in Ayr. And he would go in every maybe once a month or so to pick up his money. And of course, he would have a few drams when he was in. And when he got back to his wife at night, he was always plastered, and that was always a problem. So this particular night, they had been going home on the horse, and he was going over Brown Carrick Hill, and it was a hell of a night with wind and rain, and you name it, he faced it. And this is the foreshortened version of the story. And in the middle of the thing, he always kept, although he had money in his pocket, he had money inside his bonnet, right? And he kept the money that he had got from the guy for the ale, because his wife would want to check it out. And he kept it in his bonnet, and he was going over Brown Carrick Hill. This night had blown his hat off his head, and it ended up in gorse bushes, and he couldn't find it in the dark. He was off the horse trying to find it, and been half cut, he couldn't find it. So he went home, and the wife had yoked him about where's the money. He told her this story, that he had been coming past Kirkalloway, past there, and these guests and hoolits had come out and chased him and snatched the bonnet off his head, and he lost the money. Now, it turned out, the way the minister put the story was, he said that this man's wife, Shanter's wife, was very, very superstitious, as they were in these days, about warlocks and witches, and she believed every word of this. And the following day, he had got back onto the horse, up onto Brown Carrick Hill, and lo and behold, he found the bonnet in the bush, and the money still in it, but he never told the wife what had happened. And this story was bandied about, and this is supposed to be how Tam O'Shanter. So I thought this was a great story. So I would dress up as Douglas Graham, and I would go in and tell folk, I'm all Douglas Graham. See that, Ian Burns? Oh, you're no believing all the words that guy wrote. He said, he was a charlatan. The things he wrote about me weren't true. I was never like that. Me? Oh, I took a drink and I would see that woman. I was married to you. Oh, I could curl your hair, boys, telling you what she's like. And it would go on like this, and then it would finish up at the end. And I would say, aye, what a state I was in the next morning. I was hungover. And I thought, she'll no believe, the minister will come around and convince her that I was telling these. So I got onto my horse, and I went back over Brown Carrick Hill, and I searched, and he finally, I couldn't believe it. He says, I saw this thing in the bushes, and here it was in my bonnet, and my money was whole, it was still in it. I couldn't, I was thanking the Lord and both these for what he'd done for me. And I got it back on, and I'm going back down the road, and I thought, what'll I tell her? And I'll tell you something, lads, and don't be making this comment. I never told the bitch a word. I kept the money for myself for my next wee swallow in Ayr. And that's the way he told the story. And this was in full caution. Well, it went down very well. It was a half-hour tale. And I also spun it about how he had met Burns, where he met Robert Burns when in Kirkoswald, because he had a farm down in Kirkoswald as well when Burns was staying at Ballochneil. And he explained it, and also how the minister was a bit of a charlatan. The story was built around this. But apparently, according to this minister, and later on I'll try and find the detail for you and let you have it, because it's an interesting tale. Anyway, I dressed up as Shanter, and I did. Historic Scotland said to me one weekend, we're having a Black History weekend at Stirling Castle. Will you do a couple of shows for it? One was the Doomster, the King's Execution, and the other one is Shanter. Will you do it? And I said, I'm going away on holidays. My wife will kill me if I go to the show at Stirling. Well, will you film it? And we'll show it at Stirling Castle. I said, aye, right. So I was working in Edinburgh Castle at the time, and Gary Darcy, who did the films for that time, he was there, and we're down in under David's Tower, in the vault below David's Tower. Now, I keep an open mind. There are certain things that I saw and heard for the steward when I was doing these jobs would frighten the French. But we're down on this thing, and I'm coming down the stairs, and the light's on me, and telling Shanter, I'm telling the tale and taking people back in time. When all of a sudden, the two cameras, something passed right across in front of me. I don't know what it was to this day, but these two stopped. The cameraman stopped, and he had a Sparks with him. The castle electrician was a young guy. And he says, did you see that? I said, see what? He says, something passed, a guy came out there and passed right in front of you. I said, we don't talk rubbish. It must have been a shadow. And these two, and Gary Darcy didn't know what it. He says, well, it could have been a shadow. He says, because to cast a shadow, you need to be behind the light, no in front of it. So they had a great debate. So they ran the film back, and there was no sign of anything in the film. But to the day I left Edinburgh Castle years ago, that young Sparks wouldn't go down at that dungeon again unless somebody was with him. He was petrified. So, you know, and one other occasion I will tell you before we go, I was in the Great Hall doing the Doomster, the King's Executioner, and they provided me with all the equipment. I had execution block and everything, you name it, the thumb screws, the whole lot. And I took people out the audience and used them. And on one occasion, I'm doing this job, and the next thing, there's a great kerfuffle. We had about 300 people in the hall, and there's a great kerfuffle at the back, and the stewards took these two ladies out and put them into one of the side windows and brought them glasses of water. So when I finished, I said, what's been going on? Well, you better come up and see these two ladies. They were hell of a fright. And they were American. Did you see him? I said, see who? The guy that came out the side door behind you at the fireplace and walked right across, and he had blood down his leg, and he was in old clothes, and he turned around and said to you, tell them what you did to my leg. And I'm thinking, you're away with the fairies, dear. And then a friend said, I didn't see it, but I heard them say it. And they were convinced. They took them away and took them to the medical thing, and I got what they did, but the way they went. So, of course, the word went round the stewards like wildfire. I mean, I went up for my lunch in the stewards room, they're all talking about this. And we came to the conclusion, you know, it must have been maybe, I don't know, too many pills or something. However, about 3 months later, I was back in the Great Hall, and the chief steward said, well, wait till we tell you what happened. He said, off the balcony that probably don't get to at the back, they had put down, they saw something in the rock face, and they put guys down, and they found another chamber down at the back of the Great Hall. And it was a torture chamber. They found torture chamber instruments in it, right below more or less where we were. And because the guys said, how do you explain that? So I don't know. We'll keep our fingers crossed. But the film thing in down below David's Tower, when I was doing Shanter, certainly frightened a couple of guys that were there.
I think you'll frighten some of our audience. We better not get into this in too much detail, or folk aren't going to sleep at night. Jim.
Well, Dennis, we can't let you away. You've talked about doing the haggis, and I've heard about you doing the haggis, so I need to hear you doing the haggis before you go.
Okie doke. We'll have to pretend we've got a big one in front of us. Fair fire on a sonsy face. Great chieftain of the pudding race. I've been them all. You take your place, Penge, tripe or firm. Will are you worthy of a grace as lang's my hair. The groaning trencher, there you fill. Your hurdies like a distant hill. Your pin would help to mend a mill in time of need, while through your pores the dews distill. Oh, like amber bead. His knife, see rustic labour dicht, and cut you up with Irish slicht, trenching your gushing entrails breath, like ony ditch. And then, oh, what a glorious sight, warm, reeking, rich. Then horn for horn they stretch and strive, till took the hindmost on the drive, till all their wheels swap kites belie, are bent like drums, and all good man, most like to arrive. Me thank it hums. Is there the Irish French ragout, olio would stow a sou, a fricassee would make a stew, with perfect scunner, looks doon, with sneer and scorn for you, and sick a dinner? Fair devil, see him, Irish trash, as feckless as a weather rash, his spindle shank, again whiplash, his knee, a knit, through bloody flood their field to dash. Oh, how unfit. But Matt the rustic, haggis fed, the trembling earth resounds his tread, clapping his willy horn and neve. A blade, he'll make it whistle, and heads, and arms, and legs will snade like taps of thistles. Ye poors, go make mankind your care, and dishes out this bill of fare. All Scotland wants nae skinking ware that jumps in luggies. But if you'd hae a grateful player, gie her a haggis.
Well done.
Excellent, well done, well done. Well, Dennis, it just leaves us to say a huge thank you to you for telling us about your life with Robert Burns. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Very welcome. Thank you for having me and for your attention, gentlemen. And all the best to the club.